You're listening to the Diplomats podcast on Asian geopolitics. As always, I'm your host, Ankit Panda, recording from New York City. And today I'm joined by Abhigyan Reg, the Diplomat's Security and Defense Editor and Director of Research for Diplomat Risk Intelligence. Abhi, it's good to be back with you. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you, Ankit.
So, before we get into today's discussion, which will take us back to eastern Ladakh, where we have, of course, news of a disengagement between Indian and Chinese troops, Abhi, I did want to offer you the chance to tell us a little bit about an upcoming report that Diplomat Risk Intelligence, or DRI, is producing on the situation in Myanmar, which, of course, in the most recent podcast episode, Sebastian Strangio, the Diplomat Southeast Asia editor, and I spent quite a bit talking about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's in that report and how our listeners might benefit?
So we at the Diplomat Risk Intelligence now produce these monthly reports, which are essentially deep dives into specific situations. We produced one last month on the Biden administration and 5 risks. The new one, the February edition, is going to be released tomorrow morning EST. And it essentially is a comprehensive analysis of the Myanmar coup and its aftermath. And by comprehensive, I mean we have a team of A-listers who have analyzed Myanmar's political economy, Myanmar's politics and civil-military relations, going on to ethnic conflicts, India-Myanmar relations and counterinsurgency, and of course the largest strategic questions around what does it mean for the future of democracy in Southeast Asia in terms of Myanmar's relations with China and so on and so forth. So we're extremely excited to do this, to release this report tomorrow early in the morning Eastern Standard Time.
Terrific. Well, I think the podcast episode may actually release after the report is out. So by the time listeners have heard the podcast, do check out Diplomat Risk Intelligence's website to get access to the report. So let's now zoom in on what we're here to talk about on the episode today. So as longtime listeners are likely aware, or readers of The Diplomat are probably very well aware, India and China have had a very difficult year. Since going back to last April and certainly in May 2020, the two sides, troops from the two countries, faced off along several points in eastern Ladakh, which is along the line of actual control, which demarcates Indian-held territory from Chinese-held territory in that region in the Himalayas. And of course, June 20th, 2020 marked the worst violence between the two countries, going all the way back to the 1962 war between them. And so tensions have really been high. We've seen really a nearly 9-month-long standoff. And we got a little bit of good news just a week ago. So after all of this time, and I believe 9 rounds of military-to-military talks and a separate diplomatic process, the two sides, beginning with the Chinese People's Liberation Army, announced a disengagement from one particular flashpoint. And I really want to emphasize this point. The disengagement that has happened is not comprehensive. There are still Indian and Chinese troops facing off along other flashpoints, and we can talk a little bit about that. But the main disengagement that happened, that was announced, and after the PLA announcement, India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh made a similar announcement before the Indian Parliament describing what exactly had happened. But this disengagement took place at Pangong Lake, which was a particular area of focus, and the disengagement took place along the northern and the southern banks. But I won't tell you much more about it. In fact, I do want to invite Abhi now to just tell us a little bit about the mechanics of what exactly happened here with this disengagement. Abhi, can you walk us through the details of what we know from what's available in the open source at the moment?
Ankit, as you pointed out, on February 9th, the PLA made a statement that the process of disengagement in the Pangong Lake area, and I want to emphasize that it's actually a large area, right? Because as you said, it all covers both the northern bank with the Fingers area, as well as the southern bank, near the southern bank, which is the Kailash range in the Chushul sector. So the PL announces that disengagement has started, following which Rajnath Singh gives a very detailed statement, actually, in the upper house of the Indian Parliament, essentially laying out what one is to expect and so on and so forth. So the plan right now is the following, right? According to Rajnath Singh's statement, the point is essentially that in the northern bank, India will move its troops back to Finger 3, to a post near Finger 3, Our finger, by the way, is this mountainous region that mountainous feature that juts into the leg. So Indian troops will move back to a post near finger 3, and Chinese troops will move beyond finger 8. Beyond. Now, why is this significant? Right? It's significant because that's one area where the line of actual control is fuzzier than what it already is. The line of control is like a phantom line; it doesn't exist. But there it exists even as in that there are different perceptions of where it lies. The Chinese have traditionally claimed that it lies on finger 2, or then they changed stance and they said it lies on finger 4 last year, while Indians have claimed that it lies on finger 8. All right. Now, what has happened? What does that mean? Well, all it means is that both sides would be able to patrol that area in between. So traditionally, Indian patrolling has often gone as far as finger 6 is my understanding. While the Chinese have also patrolled that area. But what the Chinese did, and this is where the tricky part of the whole situation was in the northern areas, in the northern bank of the lake, is that they started constructing a black-topped road last June. And that extended up to finger 4. Now, a black-topped road, it's a permanent road where you can move vehicles, you can move personnel, essentially means that you have shifted the line of actual control. So it's a fait accompli, it's done, you can't do it. So according to the disengagement plan, both sides will not patrol the area between fingers 4, 3, and 8, a little beyond 3 and 8. That serves as a buffer zone. And there's no patrolling till new CBMs are put in place, that's one. And they'll stay put one on the Chinese at beyond finger 8 and the Indians a little above finger 3 in a post there. So that's the situation in the North Bank. South Bank is a little bit more complicated. What was going on in the Southern Bank? So as you know that in the night of August 29th and 30th last year, India launched what I would consider a very audacious military operation involving the Special Frontier Force, which is a secretive intelligence-controlled force, special force, comprised of ethnic Tibetans. And why they did what they did, was because they wanted to seize certain unoccupied peaks in the Rajangla sector, Rajangla complex in the Chushul sector in the Kailash region near the South Bank. And the idea behind seizing these peaks there, I think there were 5 peaks all in all that came into Indian hands, was that it would offer, first of all, India a clear line of sight, if you wish, a clear view over the Spangur Gap, which is one of the few areas there where you can have some kind of mechanized warfare. It's right. Relatively flat, and it all leads all the way up to the Moldo garrison on the Chinese side. So India seized these peaks. I believe the Chinese also immediately seized some peaks. So there was some peak seizing that happened. And the other thing was that both sides had also moved a significant amount of armor because of, as I said, because of the terrain. That's good and easy for mechanized warfare if it comes down to that. So the disengagement there involved 2 things. One is moving the armor out, moving the armored columns back, which has happened because there were videos floating around on social media. You've seen it. They moved the armored columns out. And I also believe that there is a commitment to vacate the peaks on both sides. I've read reports that saying the peak vacating has happened. I don't have any first-hand evidence. So that's in terms of the disengagement. But I need to caution you about something. Disengagement is a very technical thing. All it means is that your troops are literally not side by side facing each other, guns, or just facing each other. I don't know whether they're pointing guns or not, but just facing each other. And it does not mean there is any de-escalation. Right. Because de-escalation in turn will involve thinning the number of troops. And then there is, of course, the process of de-induction, which is that the troops that are forward deployed were immediately there along the line of actual control, the extra numbers, they're pulled back to, wherever they were taken from. So those 2 things have not been done. So that's just the situation with the north and the south bank of the Pangong.
Yeah, thanks for breaking that out. I know that for listeners without a map in front of you, I think it might be difficult to follow a lot of these. A lot of these names might be unfamiliar. I will try to link to a good map of the Pangong Lake region in the show notes.
Please do.
So do refer to that to follow along with what Abhi just expertly laid out. I will just add, I mean, one of the things that is nice about the way in which this disengagement was done and the specific piece of terrain is that it was quite easy to verify with independent open source techniques that indeed the two sides had vacated, at least the northern bank, where we have imagery courtesy of Maxar Technologies, which provides high resolution commercial satellite imagery showing that China and India had dismantled it. Now, I absolutely appreciate your point on the difference between disengagement and de-escalation. I think that's very important. I mean, one of the lessons I think we learned back in 2017, and longtime listeners of this podcast will remember the Doklam dispute. Everybody celebrated the disengagement in August 2017 when that was announced. But then, of course, lo and behold, when the high-resolution satellite imagery came out not long afterwards, we saw signs that the PLA had dug in. And today, if you look at that part of the line of actual, not the line of actual control, there it is the international border between India and Bhutan. You will see a permanent Chinese presence there. So the question I think that I have, and I think a lot of folks have, is, what is the long-term prognosis, not just for Pangong Lake, but for the other areas? And, here I think we should just zoom out for a second and talk a little bit about, what remains to be done. And for me, the biggest concern is still, I think, the Depsang Plains, right? We had another round of talks this weekend, and this was after the disengagement. We had another round of military-to-military talks to sort of verify and assess the state of disengagement. And according to reporting in, I believe, the Hindustan Times and a few other places, that meeting did not go over too well when the issue of Depsang came up. So that seems to be a major area of disengagement. Can you tell us a little bit about the significance of Depsang more generally?
Sure. But before I do that, sure. Ankit, let me add for the benefit of our listeners what remains, right? So, sure. So of course, the Depsang Plains is one area of contention, but there is the Hot Springs, Gogra, that Hot Springs and Gogra, the point area, that area there, and also Demchok, right? These are the ones that are still extant, like the flashbacks. So my understanding of what transpired in the 10th round of the Corps Commanders meeting is that India, after the disengagement in Pangong Lake had been verified to everybody's satisfaction, India had said, okay, let's now move forward with the other areas. And from what I understand, the Chinese have committed. There is an in-principle agreement for Hot Springs and Gogra, right? But nothing on Demchok and Depsang. That's my understanding. That's what things.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Now, what's going on? Now, what's going on with Depsang, right? So let's again, without a map in front of us, let me try and do this. So Depsang area is strategically extremely vital for India. Why is it vital? Because India has a India has a significant Air Force base very in the vicinity of that area up north, and it's the highest airfield on the planet, actually. And what has happened, and so it's very important if India was to launch any military operation, not just against China, I would say against Pakistan. So let's say to retake Gilgit-Baltistan. That area, those installations there would be very vital, especially the air assets. That's there. So with that in mind, so what had happened is that reports emerged in September last year that even before we got to understand that there was a problem with the Pangong Lake and the other areas, China was obstructing patrols, Indian patrolling, up to 5 patrolling points in the Depsang Plains, right? So numbers of these patrolling points do not matter, right? But now, why is that significant, right? That's significant because these patrolling points were inside what India considers Indian territory. So they didn't exactly coincide with the line of actual control, or at least what India considers the line of actual control, right? So there was these obstructions of these patrolling points. Now, how was these obstructions done? Some reports have said that the Chinese had not really made a permanent presence there in terms of obstructing. So they'll come and go, they'll just block this. But then others say no, there is a more permanent presence there, because you can't really block patrolling without having a more steady PLA presence there. So that's the situation in the Depsang Plains. Because, as I said, Depsang Plains is strategically extremely vital, right? So if those patrolling points are permanently blocked, for example, then it significantly imperils all the installations that India has in that vicinity, and then that complicates military planning.
Right.
My understanding is that is where the Chinese are not willing to budge at the current moment. So some people have said that India had a huge General Panag, H.S. Panag, who was a former Indian Northern Army commander. He had actually also said, I believe recently, that India's advantage in the southern bank of the Pangong Lake, in the Kailash range, or the peaks that India had occupied, that would have been a very valuable bargaining chip in order to secure a withdrawal out of Depsang. So it's all like linking various areas. But India perhaps lost it and gave the Chinese an easy way out in terms of what happened in the North Bank, right? The Fingers area.
Yeah. And, I mean, look, the thing that I was most concerned about before the disengagement, I think, hasn't really changed, which is that, of course, the winter in this part of the world is just bitter, and we saw sort of the climate itself suppress some of the worst impulses that could have led to a crisis spiral between the two sides, right? We haven't really seen a repeat of what happened in June or August after things started to slow down, and the Corps Commander talks just kept on happening. Though as spring and summer approach, the potential, I think, for new incidents do continue to grow, and especially in Depsang, I think that the chance of a new crisis, I think, very much remains on the table. So I think that's an important point I really want to emphasize for listeners, is that as this disengagement happens, India and China are not yet out of the woods. This is, though, still a positive sign that they are able to conclude these kinds of agreements, verify them to their mutual satisfaction, and continue talks. But it very much remains to be seen what will happen in these other sectors. I do want to move on. We are, running short on time. I did want to address something that you just wrote about, actually, in The Diplomat today, which is a fascinating sort of ancillary angle to all of this disengagement. So as the disengagement happened, I don't really know why this happened, but, possibly to save space or to sort of support India's general position, the Indian Army's Northern Commander, Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi, he gave an interview in which he talked about what was happening, talked about what had happened, and he sort of made the sensational claim that in the altercation last June, for which China never released any official casualty figures, right? India announced that 20 Indian troops died in that encounter. General Joshi mentioned that 45 PLA troops had been killed, and that China hadn't announced that. And then not long after that, I believe it was maybe 48 to 72 hours after that interview was published, the Chinese military, in what is to my mind an unprecedented kind of disclosure, announced the names of 4 PLA troops, including officers who were killed in that incident. So it really seemed as if China, and of course China was sort of commemorating their gallantry. Taylor Fravel, who I had on the podcast recently, pointed out that the way in which this was announced, it was not an exhaustive accounting of all of the casualties. It was sort of a commemoration of the gallantry, which I think is an important point. But, this sort of sets up a really interesting dynamic. And, of course, Abhi, I mean, you wrote about this in your piece. This is sort of blown up on social media in the two countries. And I think the more interesting side of that is what's been happening in China, where even as disengagement is happening and talks are continuing, China's censors are effectively, taking their foot off the pedal and letting nationalist commentary run wild. So tell us a little bit about, what you think is going on here between the two countries in this sort of back and forth.
No, in a year of mysteries, I think this will go down as a bigger one. Mysteries when it comes to India and China, because I really do not understand the reason why Joshi had to go on this media blitz. By the way, it was not just one interview he gave to one outlet. He gave several interviews to several. So there was a media blitz, and a little bit of triumphalism that seeped into some of his remarks. So that in the background, what the interesting thing was China's decision to announce that it was awarding honors to 5 PLA personnel, 4 posthumously, 2 of them officers, 3 of them soldiers. That's the accounting. So when they said 5, my first thing was, why 5? Why not because as Taylor Fravel and others have pointed out, it's not an exhaustive accounting of all casualties or whatever transpired. So why 5? Right? Then I went back and I said, what happened on 26th of January, or on the 25th of January, rather, on the eve of the Republic Day, when we announced, India announced gallantry medals. So how many got gallantry awards? And it's very interesting, right? It's interesting because India awarded 5 medals posthumously, right? 5 medals posthumously. One, a Mahavir Chakra to Santosh Babu, who was heading the commanding officer of CPR troops that fought on the 15th of June in Galwan, and 4 were soldiers who served under Babu and were killed in action on June 15th. So there was 5. That's the counting there. So China announces 4 posthumous medals. One of them, in the Chinese case, was somebody who was injured. So it seems that the message was that, look, we lost one less guy. In many ways, that or rather, if you're awarding 5 medals, we are awarding 4, so we somehow came out of it slightly better. That's one way of reading the situation, because to understand the numbers that the Chinese present. So that's one. The second part was what happened on Chinese social media, because there's a lot going on between India and China in the larger strategic sense.
That's an understatement.
Because no, and a lot of I think very interesting developments that we are not keeping a close eye on, and we should be watching them more closely. One is that there is a subtle desire on part of both countries to put this behind the whatever is happening, right? Because you're seeing Indian media reports now saying that Xi Jinping might visit India for the BRICS summit. India has presidency this year of BRICS, so that would be a major positive upturn. Suddenly, there are reports coming out that saying India might allow automatic some quota of automatic foreign direct investment from China, which is a reversal of position from something that was taken. So there was one thing that I also wrote about, and kind of seemed like totally buried, people missed it, was that India and China are consulting over UNSC issues, right? I mean, there was an MEA statement about that. Because why is that important? Keep in mind that India had Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, had repeatedly said that, till the border issue and there's peace and tranquility on the boundary, nothing else will move. Effectively, I mean, he didn't say this literally, but effectively, this is what he said. But suddenly you're seeing, MEAs releasing statements saying, India and China, they're consulting about UNSC. So all of these developments in the backdrop, suddenly, and there's some disengagement, some hopeful news coming out of Pangong. You see this flare. So, the interesting thing there with the movements beyond a possible visit of Xi Jinping to India for the BRICS summit this year was also India's engagement with China in other areas, including consultations on UNC issues. Despite External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar saying that India peace and tranquility on the boundary is paramount in the relationship, and sort of pushing that up the issue agenda at the height of the conflict. And now there is a degree of climb down. So all of this in the backdrop, this whole decision first of General Waiki Joshi to give these interviews, lay out a lot of details of how the disengagement in Pangong Lake took place, what were the cards in India's hand. The fact that India undertook a quid pro quo action, I'm literally quoting Joshi here, quid pro quo action in terms of seizing these peaks in the Rachimla Rezangla complex and other peaks in the Kailash range. And then, of course, you have consequently this, as you say, the Chinese censors took their foot off the pedal when it came to Weibo and Chinese social media, and you have this, very peculiar situation where you have all these positive developments on the side, but at the same time you have these sort of hyper-nationalist rhetoric, kind of flaring up in China.
Right.
Why this is the case, I frankly have no idea.
Yeah, my sense of what's happening here, I think part of the story is to do with the bilateral relationship. I think you're absolutely, right that there is positive momentum there. But I think a lot of the story on the Chinese side has to do with domestic politics, and we just don't have the full picture there, as we often don't.
That's right.
But I think, that will be part of the story. Look, Abhi, unfortunately, we are out of time for today's discussion, but I really want to thank you for coming on and really digging in deep into the nuts and bolts of what's been happening. I know listeners have appreciated previous coverage on the Eastern Ladakh issue at the Diplomat and the podcast, and really want to thank you for being part of this discussion today.
Thank you, Ankit. It's always a pleasure to be talking to you.
Terrific. And so for listeners, if you like what you heard on the podcast, make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with future episodes. And if you have been a subscriber for a while, but you haven't yet left us a review, please do that. We really do appreciate that. It really helps get the word out about the show. You can do that at wherever you get your podcast from. And just once again, I will remind you of the new Diplomat Risk Intelligence report on Myanmar. Please do go check that out. So thanks a lot for listening, and we'll be back soon with more.